I want to introduce, our perspective actually, and about, the tools of struggle that we are supposed to be using here in Palestine, and not only in the Gaza Strip. I mean, when I refer to Palestine, I'm referring to the West Bank, the Gaza Strip, 1948, and including also Palestinians, more than 7 million Palestinians living in the diaspora. Of course, this is the first problem. I'm sure now you know the electricity, the power, the regular power cuts. I remember very well, I've been back in Gaza. I've decided to come back and settle down in Gaza in 2005. I got my PhD degree from South Africa, from University of Johannesburg, and I'm sure you know the UJ saga, what has been going on with the University of Johannesburg lately. We've learned a lot. And when I say we, I'm not referring to actually political organizations in Palestine. I'm talking about independent political commentators, activists, grassroots activists, who have actually decided to choose another route. Another route, this is the route of civil disobedience, civil resistance, including BDS. As you must know, in 2005, more than 170 civil society organizations in Palestine called upon the international community to intervene because of what is happening, the huge power imbalance between the Palestinians and the Israelis. We've learned from the South African experience because back in 1958, a handful of ANC activists had a meeting in London, and they decided to come up with a statement calling on the international community to, by the way, do we need a translation? I'm sorry, I'm just...
If you speak a little bit slower.
A little bit slower, all right. Okay, I've learned from you, that's why I'm not...
Just a little bit, yes, exactly, that's right, a little bit.
Okay, so I mean, back in 1958, a handful of South African ANC activists had a meeting in London, and they decided to call on the international community to intervene in putting an end to the apartheid system in South Africa. The ugly apartheid system of South Africa. 1990, Nelson Mandela was released. 1994, he was elected as the first black president of multicultural, multiracial, multi-religious South Africa. I think the similarities between apartheid and Zionism, actually, it is important for all activists, not only Palestinian activists, and I'm sure most of you, especially Alfred, because I know him, were involved in anti-apartheid activities, global BDS campaign. In 2001, I attended the Durban conference, and the Durban conference was a turning point. Most Palestinian supporters attended the conference. Most anti-apartheid activists attended that conference. I was there. And the NGO forum came up with a historical document, actually, calling also on the international community to boycott Israel, divest from Israel, and impose sanctions against it. In 2004, about 120-something Palestinian intellectuals met in Ramallah, and they came up with a very famous statement calling on cultural institutions around the world to boycott Israeli, or rather Zionist, cultural institutions. In 2005, more than 170 civil society organizations, as I've just mentioned, came up with their famous statement, and now you have an overall consensus around that statement. Almost all Palestinian civil society organizations and national and Islamic forces also support that call. And that's why we have the BNC, the Boycott National Committee. We have representations from almost all political organizations. Islamist and national forces are represented on the secretariat of the BNC. And of course, PACBI was formed in 2004 as Alfredo knows. Now, Gaza is a different story. Yes, it is part of Palestine, but what happened with Gaza actually tells us a lot about the transformation of the relationship between the Israelis and the Palestinians. We know very well that, Ariel Sharon decided to disengage, redeploy Israeli troops around Gaza in 2005 for demographic reasons. Not because he wanted to give independence to Gaza, for serious demographic reasons. Now, I remember very well in February, March 2008, the Israeli occupation forces invaded the northern part of the Gaza Strip. Stayed for more than 5 days there. Within these 5 days, they killed more than 164 people in broad daylight, including 64 children. We know them by name, these children. And I remember very well the story of Safat. I was listening to the radio, her father was on the radio at 9 o'clock in the morning saying that his daughter was bleeding and they needed an ambulance. By 12 o'clock, the ambulance was not allowed by the Israeli occupation forces to pick up the child. 2 o'clock, still the man called the radio stations. The Israeli army never allowed a single ambulance, including United Nations ambulance to pick the child, to pick up the child. By 5 o'clock, the child died. 5 o'clock, the child died. Now, the question that we started raising then were, yes, were existential questions, but also political questions. Why is not the international community doing absolutely nothing about what is happening in Gaza? Then, February, March 2008, we were threatened by the deputy defense minister, then Matan Vilnai. We were threatened with a greater Shoah. Shoah is the Hebrew word for a Holocaust. And we know the importance of that word in Jewish consciousness. We are not responsible for what happened to Jews by Hitler in Germany. That was a Western problem. We are paying the price for that, unfortunately. And that is why they come back in December 2008, because the international community did absolutely nothing. I mean, they come in within 5 days, they kill more than 164 people, and then we are blamed. You know, a policy of blaming the victim. We are blamed for launching rockets against, the city, or rather the town of Sderot. Well, Sderot originally is the village of Houj. I mean, that's a Palestinian village. That is not an Israeli village, that is a Palestinian village. And now, because the international community decided to reward Israel, instead of imposing a boycott, divestment sanctions against Israel, unfortunately, the most fascist government in the history of Israel, it is of course the current government and the previous government. Olmert is a war criminal by all standards. Tzipi Livni is a war criminal by all standards. We remember very well 2 days before they decided to invade Gaza and start their new massacres in Gaza, Tzipi Livni was in Cairo. I remember seeing her live on TV with her finger threatening the Palestinians of Gaza and saying, Hamas, and this is the way she says it, Hamas must stop the rockets, otherwise the Palestinians of Gaza will be taught a very, very serious lesson. And she lived up to her promise. She lived up to her promise. On the 27th of December, they came back. Within 5 minutes, they killed more than 370 people. The overwhelming majority of whom were children, because they chose a timing when children, of course, go to school and come back from school. 11:30, and I think Vic was here that time. You were here, Vic. Right. And we were shocked. We expected the international community to do something. I mean, to kill more than 370 people within 5 minutes, 2/3 of whom were children, I mean, it's shocking. We were naive, honestly. We were naive in 2006 when we went to the polling station and voted a party that does not support the Oslo Accords. A party that we thought, I never actually voted, but people who went to the polling stations were people from the Gaza Strip and the West Bank. And this is very important. 1/3 of the Palestinian people, because 2/3 of the Palestinian people are refugees, living in miserable actually refugee camps in the diaspora. In Lebanon, in Syria, in Jordan, you name it. And then, instead of actually supporting the Palestinians of Gaza, the international community again decided to reward Israel.